I think there's sort of this idea that happens that, and I believed this for many years. I didn't believe it, but I sort of fell like unthinkingly into this paradigm of every person is like this uprooted actor that acts on motivations relevant only to themselves. And I'm not even saying rational, right? Because there's of course the whole debate of what's meant by rational. I mean, there are motivations that people can have that might be not on the surface apparent. And it's always tough to accuse someone of bad faith or of ulterior motives. But I do notice that it does tend to be Jewish people that do promote these kinds of ideas like, no, in order to be true to our principles, we have to be open to sexual degeneracy. We have to be open to LGBTQ, tranny, whatever. We have to open our borders to other races, etc. And when you look at it, and I don't know if you've read Culture of Critique by Kevin MacDonald,
Not yet.
in a weird way, this is a rational thing for Jews. Because if you think about Jews and the history of the Jewish people and Jewish race, or not really race, but people, it's an ethnicity. It's a very ethnocentric ethnic group.
Yeah.
And historically, they do better. They do better for themselves, and they're safer in a society that is very multicultural and very libertine, right? So you kind of have to think, well, what is the reason why this Jewish person is pushing this narrative? And is it conscious for them? Is it a biological imperative? Is it related to their ancestry, their cultural upbringing, whatever? Like, I don't know what it is, but the point is this pattern has been observed over and over and over again. And we also understand why it would be that Jews historically would feel more comfortable in a multiracial, multicultural, libertine society. They feel better in that society. They make more money, and they are not targeted by sort of the majority society for being usurers, for being having a different religion, etc. So you get why they would do it. It's not to apologize for it, because I very much oppose what they do. But there's a theory, there is observable evidence, and it's not particularly far-fetched. So, when I do see Jews promoting these kinds of things, I scratch my head a little bit. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I didn't read Culture of Critique, but I have, people have explained to me sort of the theory of evolutionary psychology behind it, and it holds water. And I haven't seen a whole lot of people try very hard to poke holes in the theory, other than to say, "Hey, I know a conservative Jewish guy," right? And it's like, I know a tall Chinese man. Shut up,
We know conservative Jewish people, but then also many of them fall into the neoconservative,
exactly. The Bill Kristol, Jonah Goldberg.
Right? I mean, there's people like Rothbard that I would say are genuine outliers, but there's always outliers. That's what I'm saying. Outliers. Look, we cannot, and this is sort of another thing that I think libertarians do have to come to grips with, which is that we cannot, as human beings, as individuals, we cannot judge every other human being that we come into contact with as an individual. Your brain simply can't do it. You can only do that for at most a couple hundred people at any given time, the whole Dunbar number thing and all of that. So you have to use pattern matching, you have to use heuristics. And hey, guess what? The heuristic of this is a black area, I'm more likely to be a victim of violence here, is a completely rational and completely justifiable heuristic for you to apply. It's racist, but even white people that would get on your balls and break your balls for being racist will themselves vacate a black area because they know they're at greater risk there. And then they'll feel bad about it and guilty about it, and they'll feel like in order to atone, they've got to go and attack another white person for being a racist or something like that. But hey, we know this. If libertarianism was a Jewish plot, it would be a hell of a bad one, because like half of the most hardcore libertarians I ever knew are all now on the alt-right. So no, I don't think it's a Jewish plot, and I think Ayn Rand is. Now there's a certain thing where I think Rothbard's philosophy and Rand's philosophy were, their Jewishness was not irrelevant to their philosophy, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's like a trick or a plot. Like, I don't think that they were lying. I mean, Murray Rothbard believed what he was promoting, and he was right in many circumstances, and there's still some things of value, I think, that can be taken from Ayn Rand as well. I mean, I might get massively countersignaled for saying this, but whatever, I've said it before. But I don't think that I don't think their ethnicity, their Jewishness was irrelevant to the fact that they had these sorts of ideas. I mean, I think that Rothbard's idea of a purely sort of caveat emptor type society does in fact come out of being Jewish, and that doesn't mean he's being dishonest or that it's a plot. But I think that it's as Kurt Doolittle has said, that's a Jewish ghetto ethic,
right?
And I get that. So, and I think that's, that makes sense, that sort of this narrative, this view of society where, well, look, hey, look, you buy from me, I buy from you, and what happens happens. I mean, and that was a Jewish survival strategy for centuries, right? This is how this tribe of people that was always a minority and was well hated throughout Europe, this is how they survived. And so, of course, this is now reiterated in a philosophical form is, hey, look, isn't this a great kind of a society? The fact that, of course, the buyer beware caveat emptor pure violence-free market society plays directly to the strength of Jews and to, the weakness of whites, or not necessarily the weakness, but the fact that it plays so strongly to a very strong suit of Jews, and it disallows a place where Jews are terribly weak and whites are very strong, which is military strength. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not. I mean, I don't think it is. I think there's some sort of cultural, biological, tribal imperative there. It doesn't mean Rothbard was lying or tricking people or that he was wrong in all cases. It just means that his Jewishness and his ideology were connected. But I don't think it's a trick. I don't think it's a plot. And I think it's interesting that many white men who rejected the norms of this heavily socialist, Jewishly influenced society that we're talking about, sexual degeneracy, communal child rearing, you know what I mean? Like the kinds of things that the Bolsheviks did when they took power in Russia. The fact that people that reject that ideology latch on to Rothbard, and many of them then become white nationalists. I mean, Rothbard wouldn't disapprove of the alt-right. Rothbard would probably write glowingly about Richard Spencer and things like that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, their worldview is informed by their experience, right? And so that would be relevant to them, and I can definitely see that. I mean, I've said before that I think Hoppe sort of like unkiked libertarianism a little bit.
Yes,
right?
Hoppe is a very unkiked version of libertarianism,
and I really like enjoyed that. Like that was one of the things that really reading Democracy: The God That Failed sort of pushed me over the edge in a lot of ways, along with like RK selection theory, thinking of things as biological phenomenon, and I'm realizing like, okay, some of these conflicts are not resolvable through discourse. It's just like we're not going to be able to share a system of government.
Democracy, The God That Failed, I think, is like kind of foundational alt-right text that everybody should read. You don't have to agree with everything he says, but the things that he says are very, very interesting. I mean, a lot of neo-reactionaries treat that book as if it's like this holy tome, because, of course, he ends up making the case for monarchy. Or at least the case that monarchy is preferable. Like the pure market society is obviously ideal, but monarchy is preferable.
I too view it as like imperative for white people to have a degree of racial consciousness. I thought it was funny, like I hate to take a lot of cues from Dylan Roof, but he had said in his terribly typoed manifesto or letter there, people have to start looking at things through a racial lens. All of these other racial groups, they view things through a racial lens, and their entire worldview is informed by this, and white people, whether it's through training or whatever. That
includes Jews, by the way.
Exactly. Jews are always aware that they're the foreigner.
Wasn't the first person to say it either, so you don't have to be taking. If you don't want to take cues from him, you can be. There's other thinkers have said this.
Okay, well, that's exactly what it is, though. Like, whether it's through training or whatever, or just that we've been the majority for so long, I think a lot of us just don't really view things that way, or at least try not to for the most part. How many times have you heard a white person say, "I don't see race," right? But once they've
been trained to say that.
Yeah, but once you do, right? I mean, it's not that I fucking never noticed the differences between racial groups, obviously, but I did not. It was not something that I really thought about every day, even as I was going through other neighborhoods and whatnot. And just once I got that that lens, if you will, it's impossible for me not to see it, and it informs things in a way that the world makes more sense. When I'm confused by something, I'm like, I'm missing information, right? I'm a smart guy. I'm able to interpret the world. If this doesn't make sense, I'm missing some information. And once I started looking at things through that racial lens of we're a bunch of warring fucking tribes, the world starts making sense. Things come into focus in a way that they never did before. And if white people are refusing to do that, they're at a tactical disadvantage in what is essentially a biological warfare.
Yeah, and then that's sort of the if artists, I mean, you sort of independently arrived at what I would say is sort of the crux of the alt-right point, and it is sort of the core thing that is driven home to every libertarian before he switches over to the alt-right, which is that if you're so focused on purely individualized economics and incentive structures, and you miss that a huge component of individual action is racial affinity, ethnic affinity, you have a huge blind spot, and you're not getting the truth. You're not seeing the totality of human action. If you don't take into account race and ethnicity, you are just missing a huge part of what makes people people. And most libertarian theory is inadequate in this respect.
There's a lot of talk about being a former libertarian or people who used to be libertarians. And I have I've felt compelled to, and people always tell me I should just drop the moniker. Like, I don't have it in my branding anymore or anything like that. But I still feel compelled when people ask me. Like, I still tell people I'm a libertarian or an anarcho-capitalist because idealistically, I prefer this market order. And I think that a lot of the things that we're trying to accomplish through public policy would actually be accomplished through that market order. Do you think it's even possible to be a libertarian and be on the alt-right, or do you think that these things are, mutually exclusive, that one has to leave one to be the other?
No, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a semantic debate, I guess. I think that there are some that would include kind of race realist ANCAPs or race realist libertarians as members of the alt-right. I certainly don't want to close the door on anyone that's open to talking about topics of race. Like, any white person of any political persuasion that is becoming awakened to issues of race and ethnicity and things like race realism and the Jewish question and things like that. Anybody who is willing and open to talking about these things, I'm totally willing to include on the alt-right. Like, I would actually consider you to be on the alt-right and some sort of strange zone of like quasi-libertarian alt-rightists. I don't know what we would call it. It doesn't really matter. You're kind of in a unique spot. I've been in that spot before. I've gravitated towards a more statist approach, but yeah, like I said, I do think the point of the moniker alt-right is that it is Big Tent, and there's only a few requirements, and I would say those requirements are pro-white, race realist, and understanding of the Jewish question, and those things apply to you, so I consider you alt-right.